Mhm. Fine. This is great. Hey everyone, welcome to Healthy Waves, the podcast where we dive deep into the art of personal growth, meaningful conversations, and creating lasting connections. Each week, we bring together experts and the trailblazers to explore the dynamic topics designed to inspire and empower all of you. And today's episode is all about boosting emotional intelligence for better relationships and conversations. And also at the same time, we will uncover how emotional intelligence shapes our interactions and the steps that we take, uh, that we can take to elevate it to our personal and the professional lives. So, joining us are the two phenomenal guests who bring unique perspectives to the table today. And first, we have Jody K. Edwards, and we have Jocelyn Davis. And so before we start our conversation, I'll quickly love to introduce both of our lovely guests to all of you, dear listeners. So starting with Jody. Uh, Jody is a storytelling and branding powerhouse who knows how to help individuals craft the authentic connections. And then we have Jocelyn, an internationally renowned author whose journey of resilience through mental illness is both profound and deeply inspiring. So, get ready to explore the insights and strategies and the transformative stories that will help you all navigate the emotions, connect on a deeper level, and elevate every conversations. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Wow.
Lovely. So, uh, it's a great conversation. I mean, today here, I'll first start with the both of you. This is for both of you. Like, so I'll first start with to both of you. Like, just touched on the importance of resilience in navigating the challenges, like from branding perspective. How do you think sharing this kinds of stories help people connect on the emotional level?
I think it definitely helps to show them that they're not alone, that while we all are on this journey of life, there are certain things that we all experience. We all experience shame, doubt, fear. It's just really the more important thing is the people that we look up to, they have something that we don't. They have either learned how to overcome imposter syndrome, they've either learned personal development, or they've learned how to master their mindset. And so when people understand that self-mastery and really just increasing your EQ, your emotional intelligence, is really the way to get what you want out of life, I think we can all use that blueprint and apply it to what our version of success looks like versus thinking that we have to wake up at 5 a.m. or we have to do an ice bath or, there's so many different ways that we can take it. So that's what's really important for me is just being able to be successful in my own way that works for me and my journey and applying principles that work for my brain and my trauma and my healing so I can get out of my way and into my bag is a statement that I like to share with my community online.
Wow. And
Yeah, and
Jocelyn,
just
yeah.
so building on that, and I'll kind of take everything that Jody said into a more extreme setting, which was my journey through mental illness, very very severe mental illness that hit me in 2020, in the midst of COVID, actually. COVID was involved in certain ways, but really it was just a very unexpected nosedive into mental illness that had me ending up in a psych ward for 2 weeks. But I did recover. And among my takeaways from that whole experience were one is that, it can happen to anybody. So, anyone who imagines that, sort of mental illness is something that happens to other people, think again, because I was somebody who really had my act together and, was on top of things, you might say. Former business executive, turned author, had written many books, my life was in order. And then I, went on this down the rabbit hole, if you will. But as Jody was talking about resilience, I was thinking about and how it's different for everybody. I was thinking about my own journey and what got me through ultimately. And one of the things, aside from modern medicine and maybe divine intervention, one of the things that got me through was just the resilience that I unknowingly had cultivated in many of my past experiences, and that I didn't quite realize
Mm,
that I was developing that kind of grit or resilience in some of the things that I had done in the past. So I had been a serious dancer when I was quite young, and so
mm,
I had that training, that dance training, that
mm,
kind of taught me how to um, step up and sort of lean through, move through the fear, move through the pain, um, not deny it, but just be able to uh, take a terrible, terrible experience and still step up and kind of be me throughout that throughout all that pain and fear and suffering. So yeah, speaking of resilience, I would say that all of us have that core. I think that core of grit, and it comes from different places. It comes from different experiences, but we all have it, and it's comforting to know, I think, that we can call on that when the chips are down.
exactly. Wow, that's so lovely to hear from both of you. And so I'll come one by one. So, Jody, like emotional intelligence often starts with self-awareness. So, how do you encourage your clients to identify and embrace that their authentic stories, especially when those stories include vulnerability?
Yeah, a lot of why we don't things or don't do things or why we don't feel like sharing stems from a story that we have been told by maybe a family member or in school or etc. And then it becomes an internal story that we tell ourselves. And so the first thing I really like to work with clients on, or even just the internet, I put it out there for free on my content, is just identifying that you might not want to be seen for who you are because you have some form of shame around who you really are. And then there's this buffer between who the world expects you to be. And if there's always that buffer of shame that you have internally and you're seeking external validation, it's going to make sense that you are now creating a level of stress for yourself, right? And now you're kind of operating from a stressed out space where stress brings things like procrastination, self-doubt. It actually goes a lot deeper than just, I'm stressed out, I'm doing too many things. We actually start to operate from a place of stress. And when we're operating from our stressed out brain, there's like a technical term for it, but I'll keep it really simple. We aren't actually able to clearly think about what we want to do at the core because there's this buffer. So first, I want to work with them on their mindset of eliminating that perception, right? When I say branding is all about perception, it's hard for you to build a personal brand when you are confused about how you want to be perceived. And the first
Mhm.
pillar here
Mm,
is building that connection with yourself to
yeah.
say, well, these are my stories. This is my upbringing. This is my shame. This is my trauma. This is my past. And I'm not running from that anymore. I'm actually going to tell my story because there is no
Mm,
shame here. I went through what I went through, and this can be good or bad. Not everyone has I was on my grandma's couch entrepreneur story or in the basement, right? Not everyone has a traumatic past, and I want to recognize that as well because in my industry, it's like, well, what if I was handed everything on a silver spoon? That's okay. That's okay. There's no shame here, whether your life was great or your life wasn't great. But the idea is, can we break through the shame we have surrounding who
mhm,
we know we are and who the world expects us to be. Because now when I say, hey, tell me about that time that you felt rejected from that job interview. Now we can get rid of the ego where it's like, well, I was never rejected from the job interview. I'm someone who writes resumes online. My audience can't know that I was rejected. Yes, they can, and they should. They should know that you had this struggle to achieve something and what you had to do to overcome it. And when I incorporate my storytelling framework, now I'm able to show that you are the main character, yes, but really it's your audience that's the main character, and you actually take on the form as the guide. And why I don't want you to be ashamed of your story is because it's something you've overcome, it's something you've experienced. And how can you help someone else if you're not able to guide them through that process? If you're just saying life was perfect, I never did that, or you have shame around what you went through, that's really where I like to start mindset wise. Let's get rid of the internal judgment and let's get comfortable sharing from a place of authenticity.
Wow, that's really awesome. Yeah, yeah. And okay, I'll come to Jocelyn, right? So so Jocelyn, like you describe mental illness as another country with monster just like us. That's such a powerful metaphor. I mean, how did this perspective shift help you navigate your recovery?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so that's what my that's what the book Ticket to Madland is about, is how I, went to this other country and found that it was obviously very different from normal life, real life, but also was surprisingly similar in the sense that all the people that I met, and this is what the book is about, is not as much about me, but about all the people that I met on this journey. That's my fellow patients, the doctors, the nurses, the therapists, the healers of various sorts. I was in a rehab center for a little while, and then, as I said, I ultimately ended up in a locked psych ward for a couple weeks. But through this whole 4 month journey, I met so many truly interesting and lovely people.
Yeah.
And some of them, some of the doctors and nurses, I would say, were less than helpful. But for the most part, it was as I say, it was a country filled with monsters who were just like us, as it turns out. So by the end of this journey, I had always thought of people with mental illnesses as, those people over there, like that's this strange, scary, weird world with all these people who have problems that I certainly don't have. Ironically, I did have have some of those problems. I had from childhood, I had never quite realized this, but I had an anxiety disorder from quite a young age. Um, and I had
Mhm.
always been very reluctant to acknowledge that. So as Jody was saying, I had a lot of
Okay.
shame around that fact that I was just I was, I mean, I would describe myself as very shy and or, later on I would say, oh, I have panic attacks, but I never wanted to acknowledge to myself that, yeah, I have
Mm,
an anxiety disorder.
mm,
So I avoided that thought. I turned away from it. I wouldn't say it out loud. Um, and finally, when this event happened to me, and I fell down this rabbit hole, I couldn't hide anymore. I mean, I had to just, I had to acknowledge that, yeah, I'm seriously sick here. I have an illness. Um, and there's a lot of stigma, of course, around that, around mental illness, and people do not want to, there's a lot of talk these days about sort of neurodiversity, oh, well, and it's just, you're just neurodiverse. You're not, you don't really, you're not really mentally ill. And I think that's unhelpful because so many people, what is it, one in five um, Americans have a mental illness, like have a diagnosable mental illness. So it's very common. Um, and one of the reasons I wrote this book was to try to demystify and also destigmatize that experience of mental illness so that we could all feel less
Mm.
fear, less shame, less reluctance to tell these stories, to show what
Yeah.
what it's really like sort of behind the curtain. And hopefully people will see that, number one, it can happen to anybody.
Okay.
Two, it is it helps to be open about it and to
Mm.
acknowledge that this is what's going on. And three, that it's not the last stop on the train. Very
Mm.
rarely is it the last stop. People move through illnesses, people do recover. Sadly, some people do not, and it's a lifelong thing. But in most cases, recovery is possible, and part of that recovery is sharing the stories of others who have been there, who have been to the same country.
Ah, okay, okay, lovely. And also, like, thanks for sharing this, Jocelyn. And I'll come to Jody. Uh, so Jody, like, branding is a lot about empathy, and understanding like what your audience feels and their needs. So how do you teach entrepreneurs to tap into this emotional intelligence to create the deeper connections?
Yes, empathy is one of those things I've learned, unfortunately, that not everyone has. And it's something that maybe anyone listening to this can relate, that maybe you've ran into people that we maybe categorize more as narcissists who actually have the least amount of empathy. And it's really, again, I would consider narcissism. There's levels to this. There's it's like on a scale. Extreme narcissism. I would consider that a mental illness because it does remove you from these social cues, these perspective shifts. You're, self-absorbed. And honestly, I'm not a doctor, and I don't know if I have anything to back it up with, but when I encounter these people, I have said, there's a mental illness here because your perspective is so skewed. Now, I do think that can be undone, right? And so I do believe that you can teach empathy, but it starts with having empathy for yourself. So I know that's a little bit of an extreme example, and I do believe that, even the nicest person might have some narcissistic traits as well. I want to remove that as being a terrible word. And I like to look at the fact that let's look at the strengths and let's look at the weaknesses here and what can we use, how can we apply that to our own life. And then I always say, for me, my anxiety is my superpower because when I look at my strengths, I am insanely, extremely sensitive to the point where it's like, people, when I'm on a call with them, they're like, wow, are you reading my mind? You know exactly what I'm saying. That's my superpower. So when I learned to hone in on that and not give anxiety such a bad rep, right, I was actually able to flip the script. And so to answer your question, it's all about how can you flip your own script? And if you haven't noticed the theme, main character, flipping the script, I like to think your life is your own TV show, your own movie, and your neural pathways and everything going on in your brain is either going to be like the blueprint, the script, right, of what your brain is telling you and your body is acting upon, or it's going to be something where at any time, flip the script, you can write a new chapter. So when we talk about looking at how to have more empathy for yourself, um, and we can definitely have different conversation about how to have more empathy for others. It's where have
Yeah.
you not been shown forgiveness? Where have you not been
Mm.
given grace? And how can you give yourself grace in this moment to get through that bad day without labeling it as, oh, you're just an anxious person or you're just a narcissist. You're never going to understand because when we have these labels, it creates this this divide. And like what Jocelyn was saying, and I thank you so much for your transparency. We've all been there. Maybe there was a time where I, saw an inmate on TV or something, and now I'm working with an amazing author who wrote a beautiful book about when she was falsely incarcerated and the judgment that she had when she, saw inmates and things like that, not realizing that she ended up right next to them, staying behind bars, losing so much of her life. And so I'm always trying to think of these frameworks and these formulas to create a better blueprint for others to follow and understand. And it starts here. If we learn how to not judge ourselves and we learn how to not label ourselves, we can actually look at it for what it is. Where do I need to improve? Where can this person improve? If I have empathy for myself and I have patience, do I have patience to help this other person understand? Right? So that I would say that's the start. Let's flip the script. Let's get rid of the labels. Let's honor the strengths and the weaknesses in mental illness, and let's use that to close the gap so it maybe doesn't feel like such a foreign world that I can simply talk about that I'm a high functioning person with anxiety and depression, and that I've learned that my bad days aren't my last days, right? That just because what you see on social media doesn't mean I'm like that all the time. Let me show up online and talk about the fact that you might see the pearls and the glam and the red carpets and the celebrity whatever events and all of that. But at the end of the day, I'm me. I'm authentically me, and I'm not afraid to say Jodi K. Edwards is someone who has been through so much, and she's showing up like this because not everyone who shows up like this is owning to be perfect or claiming to be having to have it all figured out. Maybe it's okay that I'm a coach that doesn't always have it all figured out.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that what you said about the red carpet, seeing people on the red carpet and being all glammed up and everything. Uh, it has been amazing to me in writing this book, the number of people who have come out of the woodwork to share their stories with me and I had no idea, and obviously I won't name any names here, but just thinking about a former colleague of mine who read the book he read just a couple of the first chapter and then immediately emailed me and said, "Oh, I would love to send you this piece that I wrote about my alcoholism, my journey through alcoholism, and a family member's mental illness, struggles with mental illness, with an anxiety disorder, basically." And he had shared this with nobody else. He had written it for no, he'd shared it with his therapist. So he had written it up for his therapist. He had no intention to publish it, but he had written it up as sort of part of his own therapy. And he sent it to me. Now, this was somebody who I was, fairly close to in a work capacity. And I had no idea that he had gone through this major struggle um, with alcoholism and with mental illness in his family. Uh, and I was blown away because he had always struck me as like me, so together and just yeah, very professional, very smart. You never think that this person would have, gone through that valley. And there have been so many other stories like that have come out that people have shared with me that I had no idea about. So I would just add that uh, we're all we're all in this together. We really are. And you may look at somebody and think, oh, that person is just, they could never understand how, the struggles that I've got. But many, many more people share those struggles and they do understand and they are very thankful and grateful when somebody is vulnerable and comes out and says, here, this is what happened to me, because it then gives them permission to share their own stories.
I love that. And
Wow.
the biggest thing we can think of is Robin Williams, right? When that
Mhm.
happened, that was a shock to so many people.
Yes.
And to me, I was like, this is a wake-up call. This is why it's important for us to not just assume that, certain people, or if you look a certain way or in a certain tax bracket, that you don't, like you said earlier, Jocelyn, that illness does not discriminate. It is applicable. It could be anyone at any time.
Yeah.
How do we navigate that? How do we help each other as a community? And how does humanity come together to not make people feel like they have to isolate so much to the point that they take their own life because the thought of sharing this is so unbearable, right?
Yeah.
So I think it starts there.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's really, really lovely. Yeah. And I'm really loving it. Yeah. And then I'll come to Jocelyn. Like, emotional intelligence is very critical when grappling with challenges like mental illness. On this, how did your ability to understand and process the emotions evolve during this journey? If you can share.
Yeah, I always think about something that my therapist said, and this was a Jungian therapist that I ended up sticking with. There were a lot of different therapists and different medical professionals that I saw over those 4 months, but this one woman who, as I say, is a Jungian therapist. She was the one that I ended up kind of sticking with and staying with for about a year after that whole event. And what she said to me one time that has stuck with me is that she said, Jocelyn, the thing that saved you and will continue to save you is your curiosity. And she didn't just mean like, I mean, I'm a kind of intellectual person. And so I am intellectually curious about a lot of things. And that was, um, that was part of it too. But she also meant, I think, emotionally curious. So I was, maybe partly because of being a writer, I've always been interested in like, sort of what people are feeling and what I'm feeling and what people are thinking and what I'm thinking. Like I'm curious about people. Um, and as I say, I'm a pretty intellectual person, and so I take a writerly approach to this, I guess, and kind of seeing everything as potential material. And even while I was in my worst state, my low point, in this whole journey, I was still able to have some level of curiosity or interest, I guess, in the other people around me and in myself. So, sometimes people talk about this as in a bad way, as like, oh, well, you were dissociating from yourself. And that's true. I mean, when I was really at the nadir, I really was kind of dissociating and like standing out. There was part of me standing outside myself, kind of observing what was going on. It was sort of like a semi out of body experience. Um, but I actually think that was helpful because it allowed part of me, to stand aside from the truly horrendous state that I was in physically and mentally. I mean, I was just an absolute wreck. But there was part of me that was able to stand aside and kind of say, this is pretty interesting. Like, there's a little piece of myself that was always there, kind of just observing and thinking, oh, I wonder about this, like what's happening now. And um uh I I didn't control that in a way, but I think again, back to my original point about um sort of resilience training. I think that if you have had uh experience in taking that attitude towards life in general, towards yourself, towards other people. So not a kind of judging, oh, well, that I hate that person, or I hate myself, or that's, but more of a, I wonder why that is, or I wonder why that person is behaving that way, or I wonder why, why do I have this reaction when somebody says this thing to me? So instead, it's like being able to step back a bit from any situation, whether it's about you, what you're doing and feeling and thinking, or about what somebody else is doing or feeling or thinking, and take a curious attitude rather than a judging attitude. I think that's it's extremely helpful.
Great, that's really great. And okay, and I'll come to you, Jody. So like while we are discussing this, you have worked with the countless entrepreneurs, and from there, it's like, are there any common emotional blocks that you see holding people back? Uh, if you can share any, and also like how you help them to overcome those.
Yeah, a lot of the uh,
Mhm.
emotional blocks is they don't want to revisit their
Mhm.
past because they're afraid. And I think this is normal for a lot of people.
Mhm.
That's why we have therapists, and that's why there's a tool in NLP we call timeline, timeline therapy, because it's taking you back in a safe way to a moment where that initial roadblock was built. And if you are into mental health, I know you've heard this before. Our most impressionable years are from years 0 to 7. So it's almost what was happening in your childhood when you learned that money was maybe sparse, or that you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. And then let's go beyond that, maybe in your teen years, where you are now focused on being accepted the most, right? In your teen years, you either want to be like your friends, or you don't want to be left out, or that level of rejection. If you're not wearing the same things that that friend group is wearing, or speaking about the same things, or understanding the same, in today's day and age, it might be trends and all these different lingos. If you're not able to speak that language, you may be outcasted, right? Or you feel a little bit like an outsider. And so then when we get into our young adult and adulthood, and as we grow and get older and on our journey, if we haven't healed that, if we haven't visited that timeline to
Mhm.
shift the narrative or really understand what happened to you, I think Oprah, and I don't want to misquote here, but maybe it's Deepak, but I know definitely Oprah has a book called What Happened to You. And I always recommend that, because that book not only shares stories of resiliency and others, it gives you a window, and it sounds like Jocelyn's book does as well. It gives you a window into something that you might not have the best experience in. So I really do believe that books are like the great place for you to go to
Mhm.
fully understand how to overcome this. And then with AI, I'm not afraid to say I also love using AI as my therapist, not my only. I have a therapy that is licensed because, right, robot and an actual person cannot be replaced. But just the other day, I felt a little bit of tension between a friend and I, and it was a level in communication where I had to have the emotional intelligence to hold myself accountable. And I had to say, you know what, why are these emotions coming up? Why am I a little
Mhm.
irritated by what I'm reading here on my phone, right? It was a text message. And I woke up a little bit I woke up like a little bit right before midnight. And so one of those things, you're just looking at your phone, and it's like it put me in this panic. And instead of projecting that panic onto her, I did something that I want to encourage other people to do. I explored why I was feeling that way before I responded. And it helped me to learn a lot of truth. Now, I say ChatGPT because it's not enough for an emergency
Yeah.
therapy session at 11:30 p.m., right? It was
Mhm.
more just, this is uncomfortable. How do I move through it? How do I shift this? Because I know if I respond, I'm in fight or flight right now, and no one's trying to, ruin a friendship. If I respond, this might do more harm than good. So let me understand my pain. Again, the empathy for yourself. Now, if I didn't have empathy for myself, I wouldn't have empathy for her. And I would probably lash out. I would probably say whatever because, well, you don't understand. And now I'm justifying for this, and I'm begging to be seen. It's the work I do about being seen and increasing impact and income goes way further than just showing up online. Now, content marketing and personal brand strategy is a modality and through which I do that, but really it's the psychological aspect of what are you afraid of? Are you afraid of really telling her how you feel, right? Is this level of being seen so like terrible that you would rather start a fight than just say, you know what I realized within myself was my communication was not where it needed to be. I apologize. And for me to respond with an apology was a level of work that I had to do, thankfully with with ChatGPT, for me to see where I was wrong and that I was projecting and that I was so upset and offended because she had called me out on something that was true. I didn't call when I said I was going to call. And instead of coming up with excuses and all this and that, I could go, so that's one block is learning how to self-regulate, right? And so entrepreneurs and the people that I work with, we weren't always taught how to self-regulate. We weren't always taught that when our emotions are, at an ultimate high, or when we're stressed, or when we're about to go on a stage, or when we're about to invest our last $500 into whatever it is, that dream, or when we have to say no to the significant other, the family member, because we have an opportunity over here that we fear that other person's response. And so before we even are giving ourselves a chance to be honest, now we're worried about, well, if I really say what I want to say, is this person going to unfollow me? Is this family member going to understand me? Is this person going to judge me? And so those are things that I would say every single one of my clients in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a little bit here or a lot of it over here, um, has, because you wouldn't need me if you knew how to be authentically yourself in your day-to-day life around the people that you love and care about, in addition to building a brand online. You wouldn't need me. You would tell those stories without shame. You might hire only a copywriter now. You might go to someone who can take what's in your brain and put it there. You might hire the person who just puts it on the page. You might hire just the social media manager. But a lot of times when entrepreneurs are making that hire, they haven't done the inner work. They haven't done the deep work. So that copywriter can't express what you want on that landing page or in those captions because you haven't given them an SOP. You haven't said, these are my 5 core stories. These are my beliefs. These are my ethics. This is what I want to be showcased in my social media. Or you go to have a photo shoot. You haven't told your photographer that you are a survivor of abuse or that this color represents something to you. So your photographer isn't giving you the feedback of, I think this location and I think this outfit, right? So when you don't have that sense of self and you just move forward, you can get far, but you might accidentally build something that feels a little bit unaligned. You might build something that feels one day you wake up and you're like, this isn't me. And I just want to make sure that when we learn how to self-regulate, when we learn how to really be seen for who we are, when we learn how to shift the narrative and embody that main character energy and be the guide for people, that now when we build the team and we build the brand and we build the businesses, we write the book, we offer the workshop, we do the podcast, it's always going to feel good where we're not going to have shame around talking about it. We're not going to have fear to market it. We're going to be unapologetically going to Good Morning America. We're not going to stop talking about it because we believe in it so much because we've done the inner work to build that brand with impact. And then, of course, after the impact, the income comes. So I said a lot there, but I think most creatives and entrepreneurs can hear that and say, yeah, that's I've held myself back there, or yeah, I've been stuck there for a couple years.
Understood. Yeah, that's really deep. Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing this. So I'll come to Jocelyn now. So Jocelyn, like in your memoir, you shed light on the perimenopause and women's chronic illnesses. So here, like, what role do you think emotional intelligence plays in advocating for oneself in the healthcare system?
Yes. Uh, wow. So this is a big
Uh-huh.
issue for me is the whole perimenopause thing, which I think is, speaking of shame and emotional intelligence or lack thereof, I think menopause or perimenopause is one of those issues that is, oh, well, for millennia, has frankly has been just the women's health, women's bodies in general, for millennia have just been infused with shame and fear and misunderstanding. Um, it's a big, big deal for society as a whole, I think, this inability to um, be curious about and open about the women's bodies in general and perimenopause in particular. For me, the my mental health collapse and then recovery had a lot to do with hormones, right? The hormones that the hormonal cycles that women deal with, and the hormone related problems that women deal with, which we feel so, everybody feels so sort of awkward still in talking about them, but um, hormones are powerful, powerful things, and they affect every part of our body, including our brains. Um, this is true for men as well, but it's especially true for women because women's hormonal cycles are, of course, linked to reproduction. So the women's bodies are life-creating factories. I mean, it's this unbelievably powerful um, truth that we women contain within ourselves and live with and thrive with, but also can, uh, really, really go down, as I say, way down into the rabbit hole, as well as, kind of up to the heights with these female abilities that we have as female bodies. Uh, so, um, emotional intelligence linked to perimenopause is, yeah, it's such an enormous issue because I think that we have to start from a place of just understanding that, again, this is something that happens. Menopause is something that happens to 51% of the population. For many women, it's no big deal, and that's wonderful. But for a lot of women, it is a big deal. Uh, for me, it was a big deal in that it really sort of sent my whole brain and body into a very fragile state. It was like I was sort of out on the edge of the cliff. My doctor later on said to me, my uh, primary care doctor said, "Oh yeah, I've seen this kind of thing before. It's fairly common." She said it happens in teenage girls and perimenopausal women. And she said the reason why is that the hormonal fluctuations, which are really intense in those two periods, in the puberty and then in perimenopause, those hormonal fluctuations can, in some people, put your brain in this state of like high alert. It's like your reptilian brain is switched into a state of like, DEFCON 5. Um, and that then means that any other stressors that come along, whether it's a virus, whether it's some traumatic event, whether it's some other type of illness, whether it might be COVID, perhaps, or maybe an injury, or anything that's like a stressor on the body, your brain is already like out there on that cliff, and then this stressor comes along and goes, you know, like taps you in the back, and over the cliff you go. And I've been learning, as I say, with people, coming out of the woodwork to tell me their stories, that it really is for women, for girls and women. It is not uncommon at all for this type of thing to happen. So, back to emotional intelligence, I think we need a lot more than that as a society. This is a societal level issue where society as a whole, I think, needs to just get much more aware. The whole healthcare system needs to be far more aware. It's starting to, gradually become more aware than it has been, but I'm much more aware of female specific illnesses, and especially illnesses and disorders and syndromes related to the female hormonal cycles. Because as I say, this is powerful stuff, and it creates some wonderful things. It creates life, but it also can create really horrendous things. So as I like to say, we women, we pay for our power. We pay for our power, and I think society needs to sort of own up to that a little more.
Exactly. Exactly. Lovely. What a great conversation with both of you today. I really loved it. And before we wrap, uh, just wanted, like, for the listeners, if one advice you want to share, what that would be to both of you. Yeah. Okay. Anyone can start. Yeah.
Jody, go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say, Jocelyn, you can definitely keep it going. You know, I
Yeah.
would I would always say heal so you can feel. And don't be afraid of healing your past traumas. And again, maybe those are some big emotions, little emotions, whatever that is. Heal so you can really experience life through a filter or a lens that is going to serve you. Because if we don't heal what we've got going on in here or from the past, life is always going to be viewed through a lens where um, we're perpetuating that pain, where we're misunderstanding communication, and where we are isolating ourselves or putting ourselves on an island or in a whole different world. And when we come from a place of healing, it's a lot easier to have those conversations that, the whole topic of today's episode, have those conversations where we can break through some of those barriers and we can connect more. And through connection, we're going to find more answers that we're searching for.
Yeah, when I was in the psych ward or behavioral health ward, whatever you want to call it, it was funny because there was a book there. They had a whole shelf of books that for the patients to read. And my first night in there, I was in a terrible state, and I was looking through scanning the bookshelf, like looking for something, anything that I could grab onto. And there was a book there. It's by Susan Scott. It's called Fierce Conversations. I don't know if either of you have heard of it, but it's a wonderful book. And it was a book that I had known about and read in my previous life as a business consultant. And Fierce Conversations is all about uh, leaning in to the tough conversations, and how do you do that in a respectful and emotionally healthy way when there's conflict, and you need to have a brave, fierce conversation. And so many of us just sort of back away. It's like, no, I'm not going to go there. And this is a book that talks about that. So it was funny. I was there in the ward, and I saw that book, and I was like, oh, I know that book. And I picked it up and I grabbed it and I just like hugged it to my chest. And I was just pacing up and down in the ward, just holding on to this book. And it was just because it was something that I knew and something that I was familiar with. But looking back on it, I think it's just so, I don't know. magical or something, that was the book that that was there and that I picked out and that I held on to, because I agree with Jody. I think my advice to everybody is that when there is conflict, when there is stress, when there is strain, when you need to when you want to be the backing away and shutting yourself off and saying, no, I'm not seeing, I'm not talking, I'm not feeling, I'm not doing anything. That's the time when you do need to, in some way, however you're able to, you need to lean in. You need to lean into the conversation. You need to go toward the conflict. You need to, really like open your eyes and look at what's going on in yourself, in others. You just need to lean in, and have that fierce conversation with yourself or with others. So that's my advice.
Wow, that's really, really lovely. And I have to say, dear listeners, today we have learned how emotional intelligence not only help us navigate the relationships and the conversations, but also how it plays a crucial role in resilience, mental health, and building connections that actually matters. Yeah. And for this, definitely a huge thank you to Jody for showing us how to harness the power of storytelling and branding. And thank you to Jocelyn for bravely sharing her journey and inspiring us to destigmatize the mental health. So, dear listeners, like if you're feeling inspired, take a moment to reflect on how emotional intelligence can transform your own relationships. And also, do not forget to check out Jocelyn's memoir, Ticket to Madland, and connect with Jody to elevate your personal brand. I'll put their website link and details into the show notes for your easy reference. And until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep riding the healthy waves. So, thank you so much.